Thank you for attending our session. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Art and Memory, Preserving the Legacy of the Incarceration Through Art. Today, we are going to focus on contemporary artists, Japanese American artists, Na Omi Shintani, Felicia Hoshino, and writer-historian Tamiko Nimura. We are so lucky to have a rich heritage of art, music, poetry, and other genres from the incarcerees. The artist's perspective presents a unique lens to view the World War II incarceration experience, such as Chiro Obata's Hatsuaki Wakasa Shot by MP, or this painting of Topaz, where he founded the Topaz Art School with over 600 students. Art provides an eyewitness testimony like the sobering illustrations by Mine Okuba at Camphram and Topaz. Writings such as those by Yoshiko Ichida, award-winning children's author, and our beloved Hiroshi Kashiwage, poet of Tule Lake, writer and actor, also reveal to the world the complexity of incarcerees' humanity. These are only a few of the artists and writers who left us a powerful legacy of life and events in camps. Today, we'll focus on the contemporary artists and writers. Their work explores and uncovers hidden emotions and perspectives about the incarceration and expands to include humanity and civil and human liberties struggles of today. We'll begin with Na Omi Shintani. Na Omi?
Thank you, Grace. I appreciate being invited to talk about this subject that's very dear to my heart and a big part of my life, art and history. And I will be talking about creating experiential space with my work. I've named myself narrator of culture, and that's because I believe in creating work that is about the unspoken. I desire to present history through words and images in an accessible and aesthetic way, and create ways to connect and interact through storytelling. I believe in instilling resilience and empathy. So in my work, I like to create space for change, and that includes change in education, understanding and questioning about historical and contemporary discrimination. It can be a healing action for participants. It can give a voice and visibility to injustice. And each creation is a meditation and a healing for myself, ancestors, community, and the collective. I'll tell you a little bit about my own family. My father's family grew up in the Puget Sound area of Washington. And in this picture of Paulsbo, Washington, you can see the houseboat that they lived on in the Sound. Here's their houseboat, and my uncle and my aunts with my grandmother. They had no running water. They had no electricity. So it was kind of a rustic situation, but I have heard them tell many stories about their experience in a mostly positive way. Here they would have to row their boat to school from the houseboat every day, and my grandmother would hit a pan with a wooden spoon if it was a foggy day so they could find their way back to their home. And my grandfather was an oyster farmer. So the whole family was invested in this endeavor. He did this for 20 years. He was a leader in his community. He employed a lot of people in that area. And he had a lot of pride about this. It was a lot of hard work, but they lived in a very beautiful area. And of course, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, that all changed dramatically. And the family ended up being incarcerated at Tule Lake. And then the next piece is called Ancestor Chimes, and I wrote their stories on the oyster shells about their time, and then they're leaving their livelihood in their home to go to Tule Lake incarceration camp. The shells also had bells on the bottom of them. This was first shown in Carkeet Park in near Seattle. And I created the piece in California and also incorporated some shells in Seattle when I got there. the curator had picked a location for the piece to hang, and it was way high up in the tree, so there was no way that the people could interact with it. So when I got there, he said, well, there's only one other place to hang this, and unfortunately it's next to a fence with barbed wire on it. And I said, well, perfect, because that really tells more of the story of their situation. And on the other side of the barbed wire fence was the sound where they used to live. So my idea about the piece was that as the chimes would blow in the wind, that the sound of the bells would carry blessings and remembrance to the ancestors. And this is a piece I made called Pledge of Allegiance, and it's a piece that I actually created with my father. We went to Tule Lake pilgrimage together the first time he had gone to pilgrimage. And while we were there, we found out that one of the barracks that had been moved to a farmer's pasture, as the barracks were sold for $1 to returning vets, and they were going to burn down the barrack because it was falling apart. And they invited incarceree families to collect the wood if they wanted to. So my father and I went out to the farm field, and I was walking around the barrack picking up pieces of wood, and my father went up to the building and ripped these boards off the building with great emotion. And I was rather surprised because he hadn't expressed himself in that sort of dramatic way, and he'd been rather silent about his time at Tule Lake during his teenage years. And so this piece has become really important to me. This is the actual barrack that we collected the wood from, and you can see my father looking into the window. So the next slide is showing one of my pieces called Remembrance Shrine. And this is when I started incorporating other people's stories into my work. And I did a call out through social media and through word of mouth to collect memories of incarcerees. And I created this lit shrine out of a bird cage, and you could lift these shutters around the bird cage to read these hidden stories. And here's an example of some of the stories that are behind the shutters. And I really wanted people to experience sort of the finding of these stories, because as many people know, a lot of these stories are not really told or shared. And I was very fortunate to get these stories from different families, and some of them were shared for the very first time just to be incorporated into the piece. So that's an important thing I think about art, is that it gives people an opportunity to express their remembrance and their stories and the legacy of the incarceration in a way that's different than perhaps that they have shared them before. And this is an example of people interacting with the piece. A lot of my work, I like to have people interact with the work, and they were able to tie their own thoughts on the bottom of the shrine after they read the stories. So I also think of art as a way to connect cultures and generations. One of the things that was very apparent to me was how similar the camps of the that our ancestors were in the 1940s to a picture of a camp in Texas that was taken in 2015. Both had the American flags, both in a very desolate and dusty place, uninhabitable. I mean, really, really not a very homey place to raise families. So that brought about this piece called Dream Refuge for Children Imprisoned. And it was a ritual that I created where I drew children sleeping from different communities, including the Japanese American community, as well as Native American children, and also Central American refugee children. And so I wanted it to be in a circular motion and convey a flow of healing, a space for sacred rest and dreaming. So when people would view the piece, they would walk around in a circle and experience this space. And these are some examples of the drawings that I did. Some of them were my nieces posing for them. Some of them were taken from different photographs. These were the asylum-seeking Central American children. You can see I use the Mylar blankets. I think we've all seen photographs of them sleeping with these blankets on the floor. And that was really important to a woman from Honduras that I met that was a mother. And she said, please don't draw our children on mattresses. They had to sleep on the floor. So that's why they're in the center on the blankets. And I incorporated some materials and textiles and weavings to add a little bit of comfort to their bed on the floor. And then I also added cultural protection. So for the Japanese American children, I sewed Japanese amulets using this semamori embroidery. And so you'll find those on those children. And for the Native American children, I was gifted some cedar and sage from an elder, and I put those into red felt circles, which were sewn with the 4-direction mandala on the top of it. And for the Central American children, I was told that they would often cross the border or travel with crosses. And so I stitched crosses of purple ribbon with red stitching on those children. And then I also created an altar place so that people could leave little offerings to the children and write their thoughts and healing and blessing to these children. And a very, very important part of the project was that I recorded stories from the different communities. And I did that through interviewing or questions that were answered via the email. And then I pared down the stories to about a paragraph, and they came into a sound studio and read the stories. So you'll see Sadako there on the right reading her story about her time in the camp. And then on the left, Ellen Bipp, a friend of mine, was reading for some of the other incarcerees that were not able to be part of the recording. So you can hear their voices as you're walking through the installation. And then I was able to take the installation out to Fort Mason during COVID because I couldn't exhibit it in an indoor space. Kellen Nishimoto and Ellen Bipp did a sound meditation as people that were the viewers and participants stood around the installation. And then we also heard some of the recordings of the incarcerees telling their stories. Here we are standing with the Suda for Solidarity people, and we're repeating our thought on stop repeating history. And that was really an interesting way of weaving these different community stories together of children being incarcerated in these terrible situations. And so people were able to hear audio as well as participate through movement, and also got to visually see the art. This is a piece called Illuminations, and I wanted to display the voices of people that are descendants of the incarcerees. So I did a survey and got about 200 responses back to questions like, what would you have liked to ask your ancestor that was incarcerated? What would you have liked to have told them? How has it affected your life? And so there's a wide variety of responses, from memories to anger to sorrow to people talking about how this really moved them to be activists. And I incorporated some sewing, the ginkgo leaves, a symbol of resilience, and also wove a rope that is usually hung at the Shinto shrines as a symbol of sacredness. Lastly, I just wanted to talk about the Sansei Granddaughters Journey, a collective that I created with 4 other women. And it all started with a pilgrimage to Manzanar, where we all went to honor our relatives and friends who were incarcerated. And we did our own performances and rituals on the land. The other artists in the collective are Sherry Arai DeBoer, Ellen Bipp, Reiko Fuji, Kathy Fujioka, and myself. And this is a picture of us at 5:30 in the morning, honoring our friends and ancestors with these lanterns we created. So our mission, we made a film actually since after we did that journey, and we've done some exhibits. And we really are, as artists, we advocate for equality and justice for all today and into the future. And our unique artistic expressions remember and share the legacy of historical injustice and connects them to today's social issues. And so we just recently finished an exhibit that was at Tanforan in the shopping center, which is on the land where the Tanforan Temporary Detention Center was. And we were invited to do an exhibit in conjunction with the Tanforan Memorial that just was also unveiled this year, and a BART installation that was created. And so just lastly, I'm going to just talk about the San Bruno BART Station permanent exhibit that I curated. So the name of the exhibit is Tanforan Incarcerated 1942, Resilience Behind Barbed Wire. And we focused on 4 different areas: injustice, resilience, legacy, and action. And this is a permanent exhibit. It was a long time in coming, and Tamiko Nimura, who you're going to hear from, was instrumental in doing the writing for the exhibit. And one of the things we really wanted to focus on was the vocabulary, because there's so many people that don't understand how language can really shape history, basically. And so this was one of the pieces in the exhibit that talks about the terms that the government pretty much created to make it seem as though the incarceration was not as brutal or significant as it actually was, kind of softened what was happening to the Japanese Americans and those families that were imprisoned. And then the preferred term, and then the reasoning behind that. And you'll see there's Lucy Nkubos, who's a descendant actually of incarcerees at Tanforan. There's her image in the upper right. And then really focused a lot on the art school that was at Tanforan, because that was a big piece of how their spirits were kept up, their ability to create and have some sort of control over their situation is by creating art. And so this was one of the panels that talked about Chibata, who started the school along with some other artists. And then we also focused on artists that were at Tanforan, and there was quite a few of them. One of the artists I really focused on in the exhibit, Mine Okubo, because she really documented what was happening at the camp in ways that really show the emotion and the hardship. And photographs weren't taken of these particular examples that she drew, such as the stuffing of the mattresses with hay, and of the horrible conditions of the horse stables that they were living in, and that they had to clean their own horse stables, and the smell and just the really brutal nature of their living conditions. So I really appreciate the work that she did on that. I also incorporated descendants and also next generation artists. Some of these artists were incarcerated, such as Roger Shimomura, Ibuki Hibi Lee, and Kei Sekamachi. They were all young, some of them just born there or were young children or teenagers during that time. And then descendant artists, including Paul Kitagaki Jr., Ellen Bipp, Lucy Nkubo, Amy Lee Tai, and Felicia Hoshino, who you're going to hear from after me, and then Sherry Rai DeBoer, because I think it was important to see how these artists, descendant artists, think about what their families had to go through and how they're carrying on the legacy of this history. To conclude, I just wanted to talk about how art takes the viewer beyond the textbook and allows them to connect to personal stories and experience history and injustice in a deeper way. And I hope I showed some of that in my work today. And I'd like to invite Felicia Hoshino to speak next.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for sharing your beautiful artwork and your journey as an artist. I wanted to present my own personal journey of how being an artist and especially a children's book illustrator has grown to shape my view of what happened. Although I've illustrated many other books, and including non-historical based books, today I will focus on these 3 Japanese American stories. But first, I do want to share this illustration, which I created while I was a college student at California College of the Arts. I did major in illustration. As you can see, if you're familiar with my current work, at this time I was exploring lots of different mediums, collage, watercolors, collaging papers, and I really don't remember what this assignment was, but I wanted to share this with you kind of as representation of where my mindset was at the time. I really did not know very much about the incarceration, the Japanese American incarceration during World War II. It was very surface level. It was not deep at all. It just was not a topic that my family spoke about, and I was told that it was a very painful time and just something that my grandparents especially would rather not discuss. And I never pushed it, and I never asked. Again, very limited knowledge about the experience in general, and then of course on a family personal level. I continued on with my college education, majored in illustration. I did not know children's books was going to be something that I was going to be doing, but I was curious about it. So after graduating from the College of the Arts, I took a children's book class at City College of San Francisco, and it was with a book illustrator and author named Myra Reisberg. I really credit her for kind of getting me started on my children's book illustration career. It was Mira who introduced me to Children's Book Press. They were the ones who approached me with one of my earliest books, A Place Where Flowers Grow. And this is written by Amy Lee Tai. This was a book that Amy Lee Tai wrote about her mother, Ibuki Hibi Lee, and her family's experience at the Topaz incarceration camps. And as was mentioned, both of Ibuki's parents were painters. Hisako Hibi, who you see here, she did many paintings while in camp, and it was their story that about starting the Topaz art schools. I mean, they were responsible to help, as there were many other artists there, including Chiura Obata. So Hisako Hibi was responsible or helping to start the art schools there. And so that's what the story is inspired by. Amy Lee Tai, grew up having paintings on the walls at home that her grandmother had done. And I really appreciate that she took the steps to ask questions and learn more about what happened and her family's experience. So as I mentioned, I really, even when I was approached with the book, I did not know very much about the incarceration, and especially I had never heard of the Topaz Art Schools. So I made a trip to the National Japanese American Historical Society, and I met Rosalind Tonai for the first time there. And I sat there a few hours at a time and just looked through the photographic archives, and I made photocopies of different images. And that was a huge educational experience for me. I'm just visually seeing all the different photographs that were taken was especially helpful for me as a visual artist. I would say there were a couple photos that I still remember that really impacted me at the time and really cemented inside of me that this real experience for people. And, it was photographs of the people who either committed suicide, or the photographs of the tombstones that were at the camps that kind of hit home that so many people, of course, survived this experience, but many people struggled. And so the importance, as mentioned, to have the art schools, some kind of outlet in the camps was so important. And in addition to all the photographs that I researched and photo references that I took inspiration from Hisako Hibi's actual paintings as well. Of course, her sunflowers painting, I wanted to include in the book kind of my homage to her sunflower painting. And likewise, she did a painting of a mother and child. And so I wanted to include that in one of the scenes, in the latrine scene. And again, her dinner time painting and the pillars that are depicted in the painting here, I wanted to translate that somehow into the scene of the mess hall. And then we have her painting of the barracks that definitely influenced the composition that I have here of the dust storm scene as well. And in addition to Hisako Hibi, this drawing that I found by Chiura Obata depicting the wind and the dust storm definitely helped to inspire me to, as far as treatment of the wind and the dust storm that the character has to go through. One of the other stories is My Dog Tenny. Paul Osaki of the Japanese Cultural and Community Center of Northern California, he approached me to illustrate his father's story, Yoshio Wayne Osaki. It's a true story about Mr. Osaki's experience as a young boy, and it took place during the time prior to forest removal, where unfortunately, not only were the Japanese Americans forced to leave behind property, homes, everything, they also had to say goodbye to friends, neighbors. And in this case, the dog, Mr. Osaki, wrote about having to basically abandon his dog because the pets were not allowed in the camps. From what I understand, Mr. Osaki was part of a writing workshop. That's where he first put this story together. And then I believe there were several other writers part of this workshop, and that all the stories came together in this from our side of the fence, which was edited by Brian Comey Dempster. I'm just so grateful that there are these workshops and these, because it's such a difficult time, as my grandparents experienced, or expressed that it was so painful for them to kind of recall these moments and share their experiences. But through these workshops and writing, Mr. Aki was able to express this very hard time for him. And then I was honored to have illustrated that. And then these are just some scenes of My Dog Tenny as they're loading the trucks with their suitcases, and he's looking out for his dog. This is the last time he sees his dog. So it is, as painful as the story it was, I think it was an important story to share, even in a children's book form. The story does come full circle, and Mr. Osaki adopts another dog. But I think it is an important story to share. So now it brings me to my more recent book, A Place for Harvest, the story of Kenny Higashi, and it's written by Lauren R. Harris. And I received an email from the South Dakota Historical Society Press, who published A Place for Harvest. And this was during the pandemic. And I was wondering, why am I getting an email from South Dakota? And soon enough, I discovered that they had a story about a Japanese American family's experience. What struck me was so many similarities, but also from my family's experience, but also some of the differences too. Here's a photograph of Lauren, the author, and Kenny Higashi. And over a course of time, of a few years, they became friends. But Lauren asked the difficult questions. Again, she comes from a military family, and she was very interested in history, and she was living in Spearfish, South Dakota at the time. She was just having a conversation with some friends about a certain battle that she was curious about, the Lost Battalion. And then she learned about the 100th Battalion and the 442nd Regimental Team, and how much they did for the success of the war. And these people that she was speaking to just mentioned, oh, you should talk to Kenny Higashi. He lives about, I don't know, a few miles from us here. I'm sure he can share some stories. And sure enough, he had lots of stories to share with her. And she was just really fascinated to learn, and especially somebody living in South Dakota at the time. There were very few Japanese Americans living there. So I thought his story was kind of a very different experience for the most part. But because his family was not incarcerated, but we did share some history. In the story, we learn about Kenny's parents and how they came to America in the early 1900s, seeking opportunity. And Mr. Higashi fell in love with the South Dakotan land and thought this would be a great place to settle. And so he brought he married his childhood sweetheart and brought her to America, and they started a family. And similarly, on my father's mother's side, the Takahashis, they also came here from Japan and settled in Central California mainly. And also, like the Higashis, they became farmers. And they particularly were prosperous in lima bean. And so they started a family, and the young girl there is my grandmother, Chizuko. She was born around 1917. I think where things differ, obviously, because of California laws, the California Alien Land Law of 1913 and of 1920, which prohibited aliens from owning land. So unfortunately, I learned that my great-grandparents would lease land for a few years, but then would have to turn it over to the landowners and then move on to the next farm. And this obviously was frustrating. And I think for a short time, my family, or my great-grandparents, moved back to Japan and then returned again, tried again to make a life here in Central California. And this is just a photograph of my grandmother Chizuko marrying my grandfather Minoru Arikawa. And then, so this is an image from A Place for Harvest. In the story, the spearfish community during the time of World War II, and of course after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Higashi family were concerned what was going to happen to them, to their farm. Were they going to be incarcerated and forced to move? And according to the author and people of Spearfish, they recall, really supporting the family and reassuring them that no one's going to take you away. They really valued the family being part of their community. But then one day, the American government came and gave the family an ultimatum. Your family can stay on the farm. We need farmers, but one of your sons needs to enlist in the army. And so Kenny volunteered to join the army and was sent overseas. And so that's part of his story. So unlike Higashi's family, who were given this ultimatum, my father and my grandparents, Chizuko and Minoru, were sent to Poston, Arizona. And here's a photograph of them, the Arikawa family there. And that is my father, is the smallest young boy with the overalls. This was taken about towards the end of their stay. He's about 3 years old here. But when they first arrived, my father was just about 2 months old. So he was a small baby. So my grandmother had to carry him in her arms and get on a train and not know where they were going. While Kenny Higashi served in the 100th Battalion, I had two uncles, Chizuko's older brothers, Shig and Toshio Takahashi. They were also enlisted in the army. And these photographs are of them visiting their family who were imprisoned in the Poston camp while they served. I share all this information about my family. It's because even though I did not have the courage or to ask questions, I did have a cousin, Cheryl Ikeda, who did ask and did interview my grandmother before she passed. And so a lot of that information I shared about the farming and everything was because my cousin wasn't afraid to ask. And she, for a paper while she was at UC Berkeley, she wrote a paper. So it's like a documentation for our family's history. This is, again, my father when he was about 3 years old in Poston. And as mentioned, he was just a baby. So he was born in 1942, March of 1942. And as we acknowledged the anniversary, the 80th anniversary of the Executive Order 9066, my father also celebrated his 80th birthday. He doesn't remember too much about his experience at the camps, but he does remember the feeling of the tension, the stress, the indignation of everything. And I know he still carries it with him even today. My last set, I will quickly share. We talked about these artists that were experiencing the camps firsthand: Hisaku Hibi, Obata, Mine Okubo, because of their artwork that they did even during those difficult times. We are able to view them and learn from them. And so myself as an artist, and having, we went through the pandemic and the lockdown, I also turned to drawing, sketching, kind of things that were happening around us during that time, staying indoors. So I just wanted to share some of these sketches that I did, kind of as almost keeping them as a historical record for myself. And these are images of my kids attending a Black Lives Matter protest that happened during the pandemic, and also them in school online. And so turning to art during difficult times really comforted me. It was part of therapy, going through what we all had to do just to get through some hard times. And so I'd like to conclude with this quote: "Art consoles the spirit, and it continues on in timeless time." And this was a quote from Hisaku Hibi that I really think about a lot and appreciate all that she did and all the other artists. So now I would like to pass it on to Tamiko. Thank you.
Thanks, Felicia, and thanks, Naomi. It's so wonderful to be on the same virtual panel with both of you. I've been a big fan of Felicia's for a long time, since I read a book that she illustrated, Juna's Jar, years ago. And Naomi and I have collaborated on several projects, and I'll talk about some of those. So I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm a writer, not an artist, so my slides are not going to be as pretty, but I hope that people get something out of this nevertheless. So I'm a young Sansei. My dad, Taku, married late. So I'm going to talk a bit about my family story and connections to camp, and then about some of the more recent work that I've done. People might know me from the graphic novel that I co-authored with Frank Abe, We Hereby Refuse. But we've done a few JAMP Tadaima panels and on that already. So I'm going to talk about other work. And I've been writing for a while now as a descendant, as an arts writer and a public historian, and as a memoirist. So I'm going to talk a bit about that part of my work. What we have here on this first slide is a family portrait that I love. There are 6 siblings in the Nimura family here, and a cousin in arms, a toddler in arms there, and an uncle in the front on the left who married into the family. My dad is standing at the center of the photo in the back. And it's one of the very few photos I have, if not the only photo that I have, of all 6 of the siblings and their parents. So I love it for that reason. On the right, we have my uncle, who many people would know, Hiroshi Kashiwagi, Nisei poet, playwright, activist, actor. And I edited a couple of his books. And so I grew up knowing that my family was incarcerated. They talked about it at New Year's a little bit and our annual family gatherings. But I really, like a lot of Sansei, Yonsei, Gosei, didn't really know a lot about the history. And I keep learning more about how rich and suppressed this story is. So I've been really honored to work on these stories for years now. My family here went from Arboga, the Assembly Center, and what then ultimately ended up in Tule Lake. My grandfather, Junichi, I believe, was one of the last to leave Tule Lake. He said that he kind of closed down the camp. And here is my dad, Taku, in camp. And this is how crazy and suppressed the layers of camp story are, right? I had known my dad was a kid in camp, but I'd never seen this picture until maybe 5 years ago, when my oldest auntie died, and this picture was in her scrapbook. So to see this picture of him in camp really brought things even farther home for me. My kids are now 17 and 14, but not too far from the age that my dad was when he was in camp. And he died when I was 10 years old. So a lot of the creative nonfiction work that I've done, a lot of the public history work that I've done has been an effort to stay close to him. So I'm going to break into a little story about how I really came to dive into camp history. When I was in college, I ended up taking the honors program in my English major because it let me write about anything that I wanted to. So I was going to be stubborn. And so I chose to write about 3rd generation Sansei Japanese American women writers who were writing about camp. And I think some in the English department would have seen that as a highly niche topic, but I really wanted to write about this topic. And so I took a whole school year to write the thesis, and I was merrily writing along, doing research as much as I could, diving into literature, and I became sort of stuck. And so I went to go see my thesis advisor. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to go see my advisor in Wheeler Hall at Berkeley. And I walked into his office and I said, I have a problem here. I have to include some history in this thesis. And he was just so supportive and wonderful. He was also a man of color, rare in that English department. And he said to me, you are right. You have to include some history. But he said, not everyone would let you do it. Not everyone in this department would let you do it. I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. What do you mean they wouldn't let me include history? What? I can't believe that this is a topic that would be suppressed. And so on top of the layers of silence around camp in the larger United States, within the Japanese American community, that was sort of the last straw for me. I couldn't believe that that was another layer of silence that might have happened. And so I believe that that really formed me as much as anything else, and drove me to go ahead and really dive into the camp story, the camp literature, and to write about it myself as much as I could. So we'll fast forward then. I've been doing a lot of writing, including We Hereby Refuse, around the camp story. A couple of more recent projects that I've been working on are here. And Naomi talked about this earlier already. So here are a few photos that my cousin Soji Kashiwagi took of the Tanforan exhibit. And it was a wonderful project and such a challenge, because we wanted to make sure that people might actually stop to read it in the middle of a BART station. So it had to be beautifully designed. And Carol Jung did a beautiful job with the graphic design, and Naomi did a wonderful job curating the kinds of things that we would include. But most of the panels, right, had to include at most 300 words, which is about a typed and a half page part of text. It was so much to try and condense. So to put all of, say, redress history into 200 words or less was a huge challenge. But it really taught me to hone my craft, my research craft, but it also taught me to hone what my words would do in as little space as possible. So ultimately, it became like poetry. So I hope that folks are able to go see this installation. I'm very proud of the collaboration, and I'm very proud of the work that we were able to do in this exhibit. The other more recent project that opens for members of the Wing Luke Museum on Saturday, so just will have opened by the time people are seeing this, is the exhibit at the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle called Resistors, a legacy of movement from the Japanese American incarceration. And this exhibit I got asked to do, and when I got asked to do it, I said to the curator, Michaela Woodward, I want to do a non-objective, a different kind of exhibit text. I don't want to do a tour guide, dry, over here, we're going to look at this image, and now we look at this image. I really wanted to challenge those viewers who came to the exhibit, if they happened to read the text, to think hard about what it actually is to resist. I think now, in an age of protest, in an age of post-civil rights, post-feminism, post-anti-war protests, we are used to seeing different images of what it is to resist. But back then, as I learned during writing the graphic novel and all the research that I did for Tanforan, there were fewer models, right, for folks to resist. It would have been very hard to resist. And so I wanted people to think about what it truly is to respond to a difficult situation. So I ended up writing truly a series of prose poems, almost short essays, as the exhibit text for the exhibit. There are about, I think, 10 or 12 panels, again, each with about 200 words or less, really trying to distill that reaction, the range of responses, and the range of descendant responses to the incarceration and the legacy of its trauma. So I hope if people are in the area that they'll be able to go see this incredible exhibit. I've been able to see the artwork, though not on the walls yet, but I've been able to see the artwork that's included. So many wonderful Japanese American artists and artists from other impacted communities are in the exhibit, including Naomi's wonderful Dream Refuge installation. There are pages from We Hereby Refuse, and so pages from My Uncle's Story are there from the graphic novel. And I believe that Naomi included part of the story of my auntie, Sadako Nimura Kashiwagi. And so I'm really thrilled that the stories of both my aunt and my uncle will be together at the Wing Luke for at least a year. And it'll be a really amazing thing, I think, to not only see the beauty and the strength of Japanese American resilience, but also to see how powerfully this history connects and parallels that of other communities in the United States. So it'll be a really wonderful and powerful exhibit, I believe. Some other things that I've been working on are memoir. I have a memoir in progress that I'm calling, for now, Pilgrimage, a Japanese American daughter's reckoning with memory and history. So I've been working on and publishing several little pieces along the way. The first one on the left here is called Tidying Up My Family's Camp Dresser. And I wrote that around the time that Marie Kondo was taking the United States by storm. And her book was really very popular, and her show on Netflix was going strong. And there was an episode about Japanese Americans and hoarding and about what it is to tidy up this kind of historic clutter. And around that same time, I was receiving a dresser from my Auntie Sadako, which we believe was made in camp. So I put those things together, those cultural phenomenons, what it is to tidy up a particular kind of clutter. And I think that spoke to a fair number of Japanese Americans from later generations who will inherit this kind of clutter, these kind of objects, and what that means to process that history. In the middle here is an essay that I wrote and published last year called To My 11-Year-Old Father in the Camp. And that essay went through huge, massive revisions because it was originally addressed to those several hundred people who died while incarcerated at Tule Lake. But my editor at the journal, off assignment, said to me, you mentioned that your father was there. I think you actually need to address this letter to your father. And then the column that I was writing this for is called Letter to a Stranger. And so she suggested basically that I address it not to the 300 folks who died at Tule Lake, but to the father I never knew who was incarcerated. And so that was published in the journal, off assignment. On the right is a piece I published in Discover Nikkei called Reframing Japanese American Bitterness, a Partial Chronology. And it comes from the small passage in my father's unpublished camp memoir called Daruma, where he talked about how he had this huge outburst of sobbing at being separated from his father for the second time while he was incarcerated. And he says in the book, I felt bitter then. I didn't know how to talk about my bitterness. And so I thought about that, and I thought about just how often I'd heard the Nisei and the Issei being praised for not being bitter. My dad wrote his book, and it was never published. He wrote his book right before Readjust really got going. And so he's writing this without history being on his side. And so I thought I should really look at Densho and see what other people have said in their interviews and oral histories about being bitter. And I talked to a friend who's a philosopher of emotion and talked about bitterness there, and really thought about what is it to be bitter, and why is that a problem? Why is bitterness a problem? Why is not being bitter something to be praised? So that's a third essay. So all of these are excerpts from this book in progress. And the book really is a memoir about how I learned to grieve in three ways. It's how I learned to grieve as a daughter who lost her parent at the age of 10. It's about being a teacher who had to find her way into a new career. And it's about learning to grieve as a direct descendant of World War II incarcerees. So in the book, I'll use excerpts from my dad's unpublished camp book. And in responding to it, I learned how to process all of that grief and all of that history. To circle back, I wanted to just kind of go back to my uncle's first two books, Swimming in the American and Shoebox Plays, which were, again, some of the first two books that helped me really dive into the impact of camp history. And Grace had asked me to read a poem of my uncle's, and because people probably know A Meeting at Tule Lake the most, I thought I'd read another one, which is my favorite and relatively short. This is called Haircut, and it's from Swimming in the American. Haircut. Papa, you used to cut my hair rice bowl style, carving big ears for juicy spitball targets. Papa, you used to work your mouth in time to the hand clipper. You were a happy craftsman, as long as I sat perfectly still. But if I so much as winced when you pulled my hair, you were offended. You became impatient. You lost your craft. You pulled more hair. I suffered. The haircut suffered when I cried, ouch. You even bopped me on the head. One bright Sunday morning, a shadow crossed the light. A tall Hakujin grinned down at us. Hello there. Mind if I take a picture for the Sacramento Bee? Jap-hating yellow paper. Papa, you snatched the newspaper pinned around me, scattering hair in several directions. Get hell out, you roared. The tall Hakujin fled. The camera on a strap bouncing on his back. You were agitated, of course. But Papa, that was the worst haircut you ever gave me. For 2 weeks, I had to wear a stocking cap in and out of the classroom. But Papa, it's the haircut I remember most. It's the haircut I most associate with you. So thank you, Grace, for inviting me to bring my uncle into the room here. What I think ties so much of my work together, and what I think ties a lot of this panel together, is the power that art has for us to work through and process and heal from history. Maxine Hong Kingston said in her novel, The Fifth Book of Peace, in a time of destruction, create something. In a time of destruction, create something. And that, I think, is something that artists can teach all of us, and they continue to teach us. And I hope that each of our works and our collective community work can continue to teach us how to process and how to heal. Thank you. I'm going to hand it back to Grace.
All right. Wow. Thank you. That was so wonderful. Thank you, Naomi, Felicia, and Tamiko, for sharing your work and your life story. Your presentation illustrates what never again means. The presentations build on the legacy of the World War II incarceration and link to the commonalities faced by us today, by those underserved and BIPOC communities. You made visible and visceral the humanness of the struggle for social justice. I can't tell you how thankful I am that you agreed to participate on this panel. Thank you. And I want to say thank you to Kimi Mar and Monica Mizota and to Tanaima for this opportunity.